Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, a very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, is the Ugandan government engaged in a deliberate campaign to stifle dissenting views and other related freedoms. International human rights body Amnesty International has in its latest report accused the Ugandan government and state agencies of using illegitimate restrictions to curtail the freedom of expression and of peaceful assembly. A report published by AI indicates that the Ugandan government is becoming more repressive with an agenda of silencing critical voices. It points out that the government of Uganda is using outdated laws to suppress the opposition, citing the walk-to-work arrests among the examples. The report, titled "Stifling Dissent," indicates further that journalists and the media in Uganda, in general, faces constant intimidation. It questions the timing of the proposed Public Order Management Bill, describing it as draconian and a retrogressive step to the freedom of assembly and peaceful demonstration. The lead researcher of the agency in Uganda has indicated that the level of intolerance by authorities to divergent views may be a recipe for disaster. The government of Uganda has asked Ugandans to disregard this report, stressing that it is spineless and derogatory. So tonight we scrutinize this report to see if there is any substance in its contents. Our guests tonight, Dr. Godfrey Odongo from the Africa Regional Office of Amnesty International. He's a researcher there. You're most welcome, Dr. Odongo.
Thank you very much, Edmond.
We're also joined by Assistant Inspector General of Police, Mr. Asan Kasingye, Head of the Police Commissariat. You're most welcome, Mr. Kasingye.
Edmond, thank you so much, and good evening, listeners.
Let's look at the methods you use. This report has been attacked already by the government. What kind of methods did you use, and how can we regard it as an authoritative report?
Thank you very much, Edmond. I think the first thing is we are very grateful, obviously, for this opportunity to come and articulate the findings in this report, and of course, direct ourselves to some of the responses of the government, which are to be expected. The report is based on Amnesty International's ongoing research. As you know, Amnesty International has its headquarters in London, but has an Africa regional office here in Kololo. Been here for over 16 years. With the researcher myself and the East Africa team focusing on Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania, sitting here and observing what is happening on a day-to-day basis. The research report again documents findings of two fact-finding missions. One in December 2010, in the wake of the elections of February 2011. That saw us go to all parts of this country, in the major key towns of this country, in the eastern, western, central, northern and southern Uganda, with a view to identifying interviews with relevant stakeholders, station managers of upcountry radio stations, journalists in the print media sector, civil society activists, and government officials at these levels. We were in Kampala again in August 2011, so that just a few months ago. And therein we met with the police. Unfortunately, we could not meet with the Inspector General, but we met with the Director of CID. We met with the Honorable Nyombi Thembo on behalf of the Ministry of Information and Communications Technology. We met with the three regulatory bodies in charge of regulating the work of the media, the Broadcasting Council, the Uganda Communications Commission, and the Media Council. Amnesty International met with a number of resident district commissioners, in particular in eastern Uganda and northern Uganda. We met with a few resource officers with a view to presenting what we'd found out and what had been documented. A lot of what the report discusses, admittedly, is in the public domain. So a lot of that isn't in doubt. What we sought to do was to do further verification, follow up that, but more pertinently, have an analysis that includes what the government response is. What the government response is to criminal charges facing journalists. For example, over 30 journalists facing criminal charges of different kinds between 2007 and this year. In the wake of the protests in the last few months, the deaths that came as a result of the use of lethal force by the police, and the police maintaining effectively what is a ban on protests, we sought to know from the government what is the excuse. In closed-door meetings with these officers, there were attempts to ban live broadcasts in the height of the April-May protests. We sought to meet Engineer Mutabazi and his team at the Broadcasting Council, at the Uganda Communications Commission, to confirm allegations of letters and information informal communications that came from the commission? Was it true that live broadcasts were stopped by television stations? What was the reason for that? And answers to this comes out in the analysis in the report that we've issued today. And the message there is Amnesty International pretty much being concerned that the last 5 years with regard to press freedom is chilling because of a self-censorship. We have 200 FM stations across this country, which is a great landmark compared to, for example, neighboring East African countries. But the self-censorship is amazing, admitted by, for example, station managers operating here. And these radio stations are a means of receiving information in these particular parts of the country. I think beyond that, of course, the other concern is that with regard to peaceful assembly, effectively, a zero tolerance to protests with a ban effectively being in place means that Uganda is one of the few countries now in the world where somebody cannot go out there in the streets spontaneously to exercise protests non-violently and peacefully. And of course, these are the concerns that this report comes up with and has some concrete recommendations to make to the government of Uganda.
You say these are the criticisms from government have to be expected. What exactly do you mean by that?
The criticism of the government has to be expected because every time Amnesty International releases a report, the first excuse of the government is that, no, look, Amnesty International is this organization that is biased, never consults us. It's a refrain that we used to at Amnesty International, not only from the Ugandan government, but governments all over the world. Whether you write anything against the US government by saying the former President George Bush should be arrested and prosecuted for torture because precisely is admitted in a book that he authorized waterboarding. The answer often is that, no, Amnesty International did not give the chance to rebut these issues. When Amnesty talks about Israel and Palestine, the Israelites say that Amnesty is siding with the Palestinians. When Amnesty criticizes violation of international humanitarian law by Palestinian authorities in the Gaza or elsewhere, Israel, the Israel says that we are siding with the Palestinians. The Palestinians say we are siding with Israel. So it is something that Amnesty is given and used to. The accusations of this is an imperialist organization, and I think these are accusations that need to be debunked. They need to be debunked because in the methodology that we use in that report, we indeed have transcripts and recordings of the meetings we had with the various government officials. How far do we need to go to get the government view into the reckoning? I think the fact that needs to happen. Again, remember, this report comes on the backdrop of just the last month, a delegation going to Geneva from the government of Uganda to defend the government's record at the Human Rights Council. And that delegation candidly admitted to implement recommendations, some of which recommendations have been included in this report. So it is a bit ironical that the government turns out, we've read comments by the Honorable Minister, Engineer Hilary Onek, dismissing the report again on the same basis, and I think that is not constructive. I think what is important is that Amnesty International is engaged in this with a view to saying it is the same standards that we are applying across the country.
Whether it's the US or Israel. Mr. Kasingye.
I think what is contained in the report notwithstanding, I think the watershed is about the methodology and is about how this report is made and of course available to the realm of the public. I'm one of those people who believe that definitely doing baseline studies, doing researches is one of the most important things that you can ever, rather than going in public and talking things that you don't understand. And of course this government and of course the police, we've been talking quite often about the need for greater respect for human rights and that kind of thing. Was, for example, when I read this report, I had this copy today and I read this report and I found that within the methodologies there was, for example, number one, at no one particular time did the researchers, for example, come and share the recommendations or what has come out of this report with the stakeholders. I don't know whether this is what Amnesty International really does, but I have seen very many people, including human rights organizations in this country, who have done researches in the police. They come interview us, and after interviewing us, there is something that is like debriefing, call us and we sit and say, okay, this is what we found out, and so what is it that you are saying? The purpose is that, first of all, government owns this, or is acknowledged as being part of this. Yes, and of course, he said, Dr. Odongo said that the Ugandan officials were called to The Hague to defend the human rights position. Before any report comes out, they call them. You see, we have been monitoring this and this and this and that. What is your position? What is it that you're saying? But if you just come and you ask a few officials around, and then you come and say, this is the position of Amnesty International at such a critical stage of our political history in the country, you're bound to be misunderstood. That is number one. Number two, when you look at the different people that they were able to see, of course, he said the Inspector General of Police. I don't know what was the time frame for doing this research. Okay, was there like a deadline that you cannot, for example, say let's wait for the Inspector General of Police or the Deputy Inspector General of Police, or in that matter different other stakeholders within the police? What about the Prime Minister's office? Because the Prime Minister's office here is like the prefect, you know, of government business, of government operations. But you don't see any input from the Prime Minister's office at all. What about the three layers of government? You know, the legislature. There is different committees in Parliament that talk about human rights and all these issues. What did they have to say? How come there is nobody from the legislature, from the opposition, who is talking about these issues that they are critically talking about here? What about the judiciary? Because there are important things about the judiciary. They have a spokesperson and that kind of thing. And so I think in future we do all welcome such reports. But let's give the country that is being assessed benefit of doubt to respond, and then
put into paper.
Exactly.
Dr. Odongo.
I think Afande Kasingye says the right things. I agree 100% with what he's saying. The point is that this report that Amnesty International releases and the implementation the implementation is actually linked to legitimacy. So the government, if governments were to accept them, that would be great. Having said that, if you look at when you want to conduct research, Amnesty International's research methodology is qualitative. Qualitative in the sense that we look at the relevant international legal standards that Uganda has agreed or ratified. Yes. We look at the Ugandan Constitution and we look at the relevant laws. In this particular case, the media-related laws, the Police Act, with regard to the applicable mechanisms. If there are problems in those laws, for example, because there are different layers in this report. The first bit is a legal analysis of the existing framework. The second bit is the practical. What is happening on the practical effect? Now, the legal analysis, we take offense, for example, with the fact that the Penal Code Act, which is an existing legislation, has serious issues. For example, the use of criminal defamation.
No, we'll talk about that. But why don't you talk to these people?
The use of criminal defamation and analysis. That does not require us to get into a discussion with government officials. Having said that, when you're designing a research, and Amnesty does this all the time, you are not bound to meet every government official who you think is remotely connected with the issue. Number one, from a qualitative point of view, human rights law and the obligations of government are to be implemented by the executive arm of government. Yes. They're not the legislative arm of government is to do a review of the laws, and indeed some of the recommendations touch on it. The judiciary is to interpret the laws. And on this, actually, the judiciary has done a very good job of interpreting the laws.
Yes.
And the example that I'll give you is to declare sedition unconstitutional and declare the publication of false news unconstitutional 3 years ago. And what then happened is what the executive ought to do is to reflect those judgments in the existing law. Now, if you go to buy the Penal Code Act in the shop, so the government gets a printer, you'll find they're still there. And Mwari Musisi, a journalist, not too far from me, was charged with publication of false news just 4 months ago. Now, these are problems.
And it's an old law.
Yeah, these are problems that don't require me or us to go and start discussing these issues.
The Minister of Justice.
We don't belong to the Commission and the Minister of Justice. But having said that, just one point. Having said that, with regard to the police, who we are taking issue with here in the report with regard to peaceful assembly, for example, and the harassment and intimidation of journalists. The person who you're to meet as the chief spokesperson of the Uganda police in this country is the Honorable Inspector General Police.
Yes.
Amnesty International has records. I have not carried them.
Spoken to them.
Of having attempted to do that.
We tried to see him.
Written letters.
And it turns out he was busy.
No, he didn't answer this. So Amnesty International is not going to sit and say that the Inspector General Police has not responded to us, and so we start writing the report. We have to do this work, and the timing of this report is pertinent. It is because of the last few months and the developments that we think are deteriorating with regard to erosion of human rights. That is the reason. That is the only hurry. Otherwise, we can take 5 years and have that engagement process and release a report.
Let's move beyond the methodology, the methodology of compiling this report. Let's talk about some of the laws that you use, Mr. Kasingye. I'd like us to talk about the outdated laws. They're still on our statute books, but maybe before we do that, some of the laws that have been struck off the record of the statute books, and some of your officers are still using them.
First and foremost, we must realize that there is within the Attorney General's office a mechanism of reviewing the laws that, if you may, obnoxious or that are in contravention with the 1995 Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, and that is ongoing. And I can tell you that there are a number of bills that me from the other side. I may not be a politician, but I know there are a number of bills that are lined up in Parliament, and part of the reason why we have those number of bills that are being reviewed is to make sure that they are consistent with the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. And so for somebody to say that some of these laws are still there, the penal code has not changed, and that kind of thing is part of the story. I mean, why not, for example, say that there is a process of reviewing the penal code and ruling some of the sections that are not compatible with the penal code. And number two is that the police do not work in isolation. The police do the investigations constitutionally, but of course charging of preferring of charges and make sure that people are prosecuted in courts of law is in the realm of the Minister of Justice, and in particular the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And these to me are like checks and balances to ensure that this kind of offense that has been charged is no longer in our statute books and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure which particular offense can happen. Let me give an example. There, for example, a case of idle and disorderly. It still appears on the statute books, but within the administrative arm of the police, we have issued administrative that do not charge people of the offense of idle and disorderly. So probably there could be somebody somewhere who sees this offense there, and he goes on and charges, and because there is nothing that says that you don't do this, and it may go, but it does not. On the whole, you cannot apply it on the entire, and you say that this is the practice. Therefore, but if at a later stage it is identified, and I believe in these two cases which is talking about sedition and I think publication of false news, these cases were not prosecuted again.
You didn't carry them forward.
No.
Some people think you become an extension of the state. The police force. Police and the NRM are one.
Probably we need to academically look at what is the state and what is government. And I think when you talk about the state, definitely you are talking about the police, you are talking about the army, you are talking about public service. But when you are talking about government, then you cannot talk about the police, because the police is supposed to be Article 211 of the Constitution, non-partisan. Okay? But when you are talking about the state of the Republic of Uganda, there is no way you can talk about that without talking about the.
So you cannot really separate them.
No.
Bone and marrow together.
No.
Well, listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio and learning interesting things tonight. On Spectrum tonight is the Ugandan government engaged in a deliberate campaign to stifle dissenting views and other related freedoms. We're going for a break. We'll be back.
Is your internet provider turning your world upside down? Broadband company offers fast and reliable internet solutions. And for the first 100 subscribers this month, we offer zero connection fees. Save up to 400,000. For more information on these offers, call toll-free 0800 222 111. Broadband company, more than you expect.
John, Mike and I will go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. So many people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also help friends see the potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He's just who he is. Special.
So here's to one like John, who made a difference, who enjoyed Miles Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the sauce. Miles Special.
You've earned it. Not for sale to persons under 18.
Let the sunlight in.
Good morning, sunshine of my life. You look happy today.
I am. I came in and I saw there was a whole pile of washing to do.
But I thought you didn't like doing the washing.
No, I love it. Anything else you need washed?
Sunlight 2-in-1 with added fabric softener. Smells so good, you want to use it again and again.
Let the sunlight in.
Sunlight 2-in-1. Sunlight clean, sunlight fresh.
Sunlight in. Happiness is all around. Let the sunlight in.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on Spectrum. Tonight is the Ugandan government engaged in a deliberate campaign to stifle dissenting views and other related freedoms. Our guests tonight, Dr. Godfrey Odongo, researcher in charge of East Africa from the Amnesty International Africa Regional Office, and Mr. Asan Kasingye, Assistant Inspector General of Police, right now head of the Police Commissariat. You'll be able to call in shortly and contribute to this discussion. Mr. Odongo, you say that there are laws on the statute books that are outdated, and some are current but draconian. Which are some of them?
I think just taking from what Kasingye said, I think it is important that that because as a lawyer myself, I think it is very critical that laws that we're dealing with, and especially in terms of public knowledge, that laws are updated. So if the Constitutional Court decides and says that based on analysis, the crime of sedition is unconstitutional, the publication of false news, Section 50 of the Penal Code Act, is unconstitutional because it is too vague and infringes on the right freedom of expression, I think the next logical thing that should happen is that the updated versions of the Penal Code that you go and buy from the statute book shops should not have these crimes. I mean, that will then take away the possibility that a police investigating officer in Masaka, for example, who has an outdated version, looks at that and still thinks Section 50 is valid when it is not valid. We've documented cases of journalists still being charged with some of these crimes.
Publication of false news.
When they ought not to be, when they ought not to be there, in particular publication of false news. Now, sedition is a bit more recent, having been declared unconstitutional in August last year. Now, but having said that, I think the bigger concern again is that the architecture of the Penal Code Act still allows for certain laws that, in a way, in and of themselves, from the way they are construed, will be construed in the application to limit freedom of expression. Now, criminal defamation is a law. Criminal defamation or libel is a law that journalists in this country have tried to challenge. Of course, they've gone to court, and the court process is still going on with regard to this. But having said that, Amnesty International takes its interpretation from Uganda's obligations under international law. The international law we're talking about here is Article 19. Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights has a right to freedom of expression, which right has been constitutionalized under Article 29 of the Ugandan Constitution. What is the essence of this right? The essence of this right is that every person has the right to receive and impart information. And freedom of expression then is not a right for journalists. It is a right for the collective, for the public. Right. And that is the essence of it. Now,